Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Katrina Sale, and I'm here on behalf of the Entrepreneurs Network, which is a think tank for the UK's most ambitious entrepreneurs. And I have the privilege of chairing our Green Entrepreneurship panel, where we bring together green entrepreneurs, like the ones we have here, to talk about the challenges and opportunities for green business and how the government can support us. So tonight we're going to be having a kind of fireside chat with three of the UK's leading entrepreneurs, Will Richardson, Johan, and Simon Daniel, who are going to be talking to us about their startup story, what their business does, and some of their insights into what's coming down the path for green businesses and what we'll be doing to support the industry. So I'm going to leave it to them to tell you about their businesses and how they've started. Will, why don't you kick us off?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, and thanks very much for coming along today. So my name's Will Richardson. I started up Green Element back in 2003. So I do feel like I've been pushing water up a hill for a very long time. I now currently feel like I'm almost pushing it down a hill. So kudos to everyone that's actually thinking about sustainability now. I think that's really important. We, over the last 10, 15 years, have been working for number of different organisations, from real one-person companies all the way up to the likes of The Guardian or NatWest. We actually share a client with. We've just invented their carbon planner, so automating carbon reductions across all of their SMEs. And, you know, over that time, we've seen such a big difference in organisations trying to be more sustainable and trying to reduce their environmental impact. One of the things that I think has been really cool to see is the Advertising Association, and the fact the Advertising Association used us to report on their carbon emissions across the whole of the industry. And I don't know if you know, if anyone's in the industry here, but what they're now doing is they're rolling out to the rest of the world. It's the first industry in the world to actually look at the carbon emissions as a whole, and we've been a part of that journey. So it's really cool, to be honest with you. Green Element Group is on a mission to help as many organisations as possible to make a just transition to a sustainable world. Green Element Group already supports companies worldwide, but we want to increase our presence in Australia and North America. I think politically we are starting off in Australia because of the change in politics, and we can see that there's a real emphasis to drive sustainability there. But what we are doing is partnering with organisations in those respective geographical regions, because culture comes into everything. And if there's one thing I've learnt in growing Green Elements and Compare Your Footprint, is that culture is a big part of sustainability as well, and behaviour change. So it ties very much in with the way that we think as a business. I think some of you are here to understand what it is that you can do and how to become more sustainable. I would say that make sure you walk the talk, investigate your own operations, avoid social and greenwashing, and make sure you understand your own company's carbon footprints. Set science-based targets and put in solutions early to minimise your impact. We became a B Corp back in 2015. I think we were in the top 100 businesses. There were 100 B Corps at the time. And it's really forged the way forward for us. I think we were 4 or 5 people at that moment in time. And so you can see the growth that we've seen over the last, since 2015, we're now 36 people and growing at the same rate. And I look at it as people ask me, well, how does that work? And if you think you've got one team, you bring on one person or 2 people. If you have 5 teams, you bring on 1 or 2 people. It starts to grow exponentially, and I think that's what we're starting to see. And understanding your sustainable practice, understanding your purpose will help you to attract and retain your people you work with. It will help you with your funding. It will give you a competitive advantage, improve reputation, and build business resilience as we transition to a low carbon economy. So what can you do if you're a one-person company? I would suggest that have a look at your website. It's something that we did recently. We looked at our website and redesigned it from the bottom up using Tom Greenwood's Sustainable Website Design Guidance. Our website was 88% dirtier than others, and that was measured through a website carbon calculator. That was embarrassing, considering we were sustainability experts. It's now 66% cleaner, and that's just through looking at what it is that we do and how we manage that website. And in that process, we have introduced and implemented and improved digital accessibility across Green Element and Compare Your Footprint websites. And in doing so, we're making some of the most critical information in the world, how to stop the climate crisis, available to the masses through improved marketing and communications. And I think that's really important. I think one of the things that struck me was I've heard the argument that changing your website so it's accessible to everyone, surely it's all about design. It's all about what it looks like. We can't have it accessible because we need to make it look flashy. I've had more compliments on our Compare Your Footprint website since the redesign than I've ever had before. And it's the most accessible website that we've ever had before. So if that says anything, I think that says it all, personally. So if you're interested in understanding what it is you want to do and how to become more sustainable, we've created a guide to offer organisations a best practice to help them on your journey to net zero. And the organisers will share this with you after the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Will. Oh, hello. Thank you very much, Will. That's fantastic. Right, we're going to come back to ask a few more questions around the things you've been talking about there. So just so everybody knows, we are going to do Q&A after introductory thoughts. So write down your questions, bank them, and we'll come back for that. Jo, would you give us an introduction to your business and your story?
Sure, thank you. It's really good to be here and to see so many of you interested in sustainability. My name's Jo Hand, and I set up Giki in 2017 with my husband James. I've been in sustainability for about 18 years, and what's been wonderful in the last 3 years and then 2 years, and each year it ramps up, is the growing interest in sustainability. So our team, of which we're about 13 now, is made up, I'd say, pretty much solely of people who've come from the commercial sector but have decided that they want to work in sustainability. So they've made a very clear lifestyle decision that actually they want to take a pay cut, work for a B corporation, because they really want to work for a purpose-driven organization. So what do we actually do? So we're a tech company, and we provide a platform which is both a web app and an app that you can get on your phone, which enables you to understand your carbon footprint and find multiple ways to reduce it. And part of the way that we work, so there's an individual offering, but there's also a pro version, and we work with a whole range of companies and organizations, actually more broadly, who want to engage their staff around what can we actually do within our own personal lifestyles. And even 5 years ago, companies helping individuals in their own personal lifestyles was kind of unheard of. And then the kind of wellness and particularly mental health became something that was important to employers, and I'd say that this is the next example of that, where employers are actually really keen to help individuals. There are a number of reasons for that. Firstly, there is increasing pressure from employees that employers are showing what they're actually doing from a sustainability perspective. So NatWest is one of our shared clients who we work with, is probably the best example of this. So the fact that we work with them was driven entirely by employees, quite junior employees, who wanted to provide something to all staff across NatWest so that they could make changes in their own lifestyle and actually understand about sustainability. And we also work with companies who are at the kind of opposite, in an opposite situation, that they've got a very strong sustainability commitment. So they might have set science-based targets. They might be in the Race to Zero, which is the UN initiative to get to net zero as quickly as we possibly can. And they want to bring their people with them. And actually, if you want to execute on a strategy that you're really committed to, you need your buy-in from your employees. And I think this is people are becoming more and more aware of the fact that bringing your people with you on sustainability is absolutely crucial. So you need to help people understand why it's such a high priority. And actually, the reality is, my view is that as a company, you either embrace sustainability and put it high up your agenda now, or you will be forced to do it in the future. So it's either a choice now when you embrace it and capitalize on all the many opportunities that are around it, or you actually are forced into it through regulation and through drivers such as investor and customer pressure as well. But in terms of well, I guess why we set Giki up, I was really struck with the organisation I worked with previously, which was a climate change charity, where we used the power of the institutional investor to instruct their portfolio companies, the largest companies in the world, to measure and report their carbon emissions. It's called CDP, and it's been a real pioneer in driving corporate understanding of climate. And I thought, well, look, individuals are not part of this piece here, and individuals increasingly want to do something about climate change and are concerned about the planet, but don't really know what they can do. And that was why we built Giki. And it's been sort of iterative, and it's been, as you can imagine, a roller coaster, as everybody who's set up a business says. But it's fantastic now. We feel a bit like you, that we're not pushing the rock up a hill quite so hard. So we're working with quite a few big banks and global consultancies and big global tech companies who really see the value in helping people reduce their carbon footprint. And just to highlight why we as individuals really do matter, the recent UN IPCC report, or there have been many of them, but the recent working group one that came out in April, for the first time ever, had a whole chapter on the importance of the individual. And they say that we can hit the required targets to keep temperature rise below the 1.5 degree threshold, which is what we need to do if we're to keep things under control, by about 40 to 70% of those changes required can be driven through individuals. And the more that we act together collectively, which, sometimes we're fantastic at as humans, sometimes we're not quite so good at it. But when we embrace the good side of human nature, there's so much that we can do together. And that's what we're hoping to harness with Giki.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Joe. Right, Simon, if you could give us an introduction to your business and your story, and then we're going to come straight to Q&A. I'll kick off with a couple, but just pop your hand up. And for those at home, you can also raise questions. So just write them into the question box, and they'll be raised on your behalf. Go ahead, Simon.
Hi, I'm Simon Daniel. I founded a company called Moixa, which is now part of Lunar Energy, about 17 years ago in 2006. And we did early research in the sort of smart and energy home and pioneered some of the first smart batteries for homes to store solar and shift it to the evening to reduce peak bills. And then we sort of pivoted to focus on the software to manage large fleets of batteries and large fleets of electric vehicles. And we found that by partnering with companies who make batteries, we started to scale. So we partnered with companies in Japan, like Itochu. We now have one of the world's largest fleets of batteries managed in homes, about a third of a gigawatt hour in Japan across 35,000 homes. And this helps shift solar, reduce evening load on the grid, which is very topical because that gets rid of gas off the grid, which helps reduce carbon, also helps reduce bills if we get gas off the peak. And then we expanded to manage vehicles, smart charging for Honda. And now we've actually partnered and been acquired by a new company called Lunar Energy, which we announced 10 days ago, which we've been in stealth for 2 years. They acquired us last year. We've now raised $300 million to really scale to help the electrification company to help all homes transition to 100% clean energy by focusing on smart hardware and smart software and bringing the two teams together. My team in the UK is now about 87, predominantly software engineering, with a lot of experience in batteries and home electrification, and we've partnered with an American team who are building some of the hard physical products to really help homes electrify. It's been a long journey, particularly in funding, but to a couple of points which I think are really interesting is, I started Moixa as an individual. I then found a great CTO, Chris Wright. We then scaled over a number of years through lots of different rounds until we really nailed strategic partnerships and used those to really fund our scale, both as a company, but really we then rely on their balance sheets to build and sell products in real scale. And then now with America, some of our investors are the largest solar installer in America, Sunrun. We have a large battery company, SK, in Korea. So we're now partnered with companies with hundreds of billions of dollars of market cap. But we act as a seed for innovation and getting things done. There's a very famous quote from Buckminster Fuller, which is, he put it on his gravestone, it was like, be a trim tab. What a trim tab is a bit of a rudder which helps the rudder move. So you've got a big ship, you want to change its direction, like a big corporation. If you're the rudder as a new tech company, actually the idea is the trim tab. You move this little thing which helps govern and shift the rudder of this thing, which helps change the direction of travel for this juggernaut, this big container ship or this plane. And so the role of individuals and startups is really to get to the point that you can influence and impact larger vehicles of change, governments and policy, companies, to use your technology and scale it. And so one person can change the world, one idea can change the world through collaboration of partnerships and really creating this engine of change and seeding ideas which big companies move. We've been around a long time, like Will's company, and over that time we've seen clean tech move from being a sector to being sort of a big growth industry sector, raising lots of capital, to now being essential in the in-tray for every prime minister and company in the world. The energy transition is horrible, it's difficult. We've got to replace the entire last century infrastructure within 10 years and electrify it. We then got to do it again to electrify mobility, and then we've got to do it again by 2050 to electrify heat. These are significant challenges where things like smart software, AI, help do things quickly, help maximize efficiency, take over existing resources, but there needs to be a whole engineering change to actually make the physically hard things to change from this old world to the new world. And now it's essential. The funding was hard historically because you had to convince people of this big challenge. Now you don't have to convince people, you have to do it really quickly. And there is an urgency to get things done in scale. As we see in America, there's a lot of policy support, $370 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act, to get things done quickly. And I can touch on some of the differences and opportunities with policy here a bit later, but it's interesting to sort of compare and contrast different markets we work in, from Japan to Europe to United States.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. Well, I'm going to lean into, for our first question, I'm going to lean into something you were saying there around this rudder and moving the juggernaut. And I think it'd be really interesting to understand what it is you all look for, either in partnerships or your clients and also suppliers. So, when you're building these relationships with organizations who are maybe becoming more sustainable, but they're not there yet, what kind of commitments are you looking for, and what kind of you mentioned science-based targets, which are quantifiable things. What are you looking for from suppliers to ensure that they fit within your brand's ethos and sustainability goals? Simon, I'll start with you and the partnerships part.
So, I mean, we found strategic investors became critical as an investor who understand our technology and as a channel to really take our technology and scale it. And all companies really recognize that fundamentally they have to change their business model into a sustainable future. And there's a difference in some companies. I went to COP last year, and there was a panel I think we were on part of, where some of the sort of food companies were talking about sort of green as a marketing segment to be sold to, and they missed the point in their sort of packaging strategy. They were saying, if we make it better, people will buy more of it from us and we'll succeed, rather than realize they've got to change their fundamental business model. So quite a lot of companies realize that's critical. It's also one of the biggest economic opportunities in the world. We've got to transition trillions of dollars from this old world into the new world, and you can see that by the sort of hundreds of millions of dollars, and then billions of dollars some of our clients are selling in the sector. In e-mobility, companies like Honda, which originally was an oil-based motor company that make engines, realize they're a bit late. They've got to change and electrify everything, and that's hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue. They've got to move from one type of product to a new product. So it's really recognizing that partners need to change, and also you do need support whether the company actually fundamentally gets it, because some partners sort of don't follow all the sort of guidelines in terms of they don't cover all the data properly, and they maybe want to do a test rather than go out full out. But the companies which will succeed and survive and be here in 2050 will be the ones which are part of that transition.
Thank you, Simon. Joe, how about you?
So in terms of our suppliers, we're a B corporation as well. So B corporations have very structured policies around many things, including suppliers. So we don't have very many because we're effectively a software company, and we with an additional advisory consultancy part that is delivered by people. So all of our people are true believers, and that's why they work with us. In terms of clients, there's a fairly well-trodden path that companies take in this sort of move from what Simon was describing, from not thinking about sustainability to being, really being truly committed. And I'd say frequently the first step beyond, once people have realised it's an area they're interested in and want to do something about, is measure and understand your own operational footprint, which is what you do with people, and then develop a plan, which you also need to execute on. That can often be much harder than developing the plan. And then where we tend to come in is at the stage where companies have gone through that evolution and then want to engage and bring their people with them. So we don't tend to be the right fit for companies who have never thought about sustainability before. It's just too early for them. But most companies, however sophisticated their commitments are, and indeed their delivery around sustainability, there's nearly always a very big job to do in terms of engagement and people education and helping staff actually see this really as a top priority for the business.
Fantastic, thank you. And Will, same question to you, but also if you could just kind of give a summary of what does science-based targets actually mean? Because lots of people aren't entirely sure about the term, and there are so many different ways of measuring those. So if you could just give a kind of overview, that would be great.
Sure. Well, I'll start off with, I would say the one thing our clients have in common is the fact that they all want to be more sustainable. You won't come to Green Element or compare your footprint if you don't. Partly driven by the fact that we'll call you out and tell you that you are full of something if you do come to us. Science-based targets really helps with that conversation. I think science-based targets is going to be a massive really good tool for organisations to be able to be called out, because what we're ultimately doing with that methodology is looking at short-term targets, so 2030, looking at long-term targets, 2050, of real net zero, and working out the emission reductions that you need to do to get to 2050 and 2030. And so that is looking at scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So basically all your emissions. And it's really important that organisations go down that route, because it means then they can't offset their way out of it, because offsetting isn't a part of the carbon science-based targets. Carbon removals are, and you can do that for the last 5-10%, but that is literally the last 5-10%.
Fantastic, thank you. Right, one more question to you all from me, and then we're going to come to everybody else, and it's, what policy would you like to see the new government, what policies would you like to see from them? And we'll go back down the line again. Will, go ahead.
Well, why not science-based targets? Every single company on Companies House has to set their science-based target.
Excellent. Joe?
I'm afraid I'm not going to give such a succinct answer, but in terms of individuals, which is what we focus on, and the role that we as individuals will need to play in solving the climate crisis, we see the range of where we all are, from the super green, so people will change things because they believe that they deeply concerned and want to do it anyway, irrespective of everything else. The concerned but busy, who are people who are genuinely concerned about what's going on with the environment, but have a ton of other stuff going on and priorities and can't necessarily do exactly what they'd hoped to do. There are then the pragmatic greens, who will change where there's a pragmatic reason to do it, and typically that's price, and that is where policy, in particular, that group and actually the concerned but busy greens can play such a crucial role. And we've seen it with electric vehicles already in this country, with the ban of the new sale of petrol and diesel cars in 2030. We're already seeing mass growth in electric vehicles. There's a massive challenge around infrastructure and charging, which needs to be dealt with. But you can see when the policy signals are really clear, people do change, and it's much easier to change, and actually getting the pricing right as well is crucial, and that's where policy can play a really important role.
I think there's important opportunities in sharing best practice in this response to this major energy transition. So the American Inflation Reduction Act, which is $370 billion, is a good example of money going into infrastructure initiatives which change the energy landscape. Europe's about to change in the short term how the energy and electricity market is regulated, because there's an oddity that when you have very high gas prices, that drives up the cost of very low cost renewables. It's like saying the price of an aluminium commodity should be the most expensive producer who's really inefficient, sets the market. But that needs to change really quickly. So the government's announcement today that they are going to do a review of the energy market is encouraging, but they need to do it really quickly. There's a long-term review called REMA underway, but they need to do just test it out now in a sandbox. They also announced that they will review net zero and how do we achieve it whilst making money for business and growing, which is sort of a valid thing. Chris Skidmore's going to lead that review. There's also immediate needs to lower the cost of energy by having this price gap, which is fair, and they need to do that because that's otherwise going to be shout out any actual debate for the next few months. But he also announced more fracking, more 100 licenses for oil and gas. So there's a challenge. If you burn more stuff, that makes the target harder to do, because we have to halve carbon every decade to get to the end result. And I think an important opportunity for policy is to look at the end result. In 2050, we are at net zero. Otherwise, the planet and everything else is challenging. So what does net zero look like, and work backwards? Is there even any money in 2050? If we consider how energy markets flow, and I looked at a model which I think the government could do called energy pensions or net zero pensions, because the government owes 8 trillion for future pensions, of which 6 trillion is unfunded, like the state pension. But currently 1/7 of that is spent on energy and mobility in retirement before the numbers went up. So now it's several trillion is spent on energy and mobility. So ultimately, government is the payer of every pension or energy bill, of every universal credit bill, and basically is a form of nationalised system. So if you gave energy as a service or transport as a service instead of money to buy energy, it would bias the money for infrastructure and free up $1 trillion worth of funding today, which could be spent on infrastructure and then paid back as service rather than additional debt on the future workers who will not be paying these debts. So there's opportunity to take a radical approach, look at the end result, work backwards, look at the 10-year goal, halve carbon every decade, whilst at the same time you've got to make some immediate fast fixes because it's a major problem. But it does mean energy transition is going to happen faster. And so whilst the turmoil of change is really difficult, it does mean Europe and the world needs to degas really super quickly, and people are regretting not doing it earlier. You can decouple from energy bills by going solar, going battery. You can decouple from oil by going EV. The more people who decouple, the more there is less gas on the system, which means the bills are in favour of renewables. And the UK is a market which is an island. And so over 95% of our electricity is local. We've been exporting electricity in the last few days to Europe, but we have to get it right because quite a lot of the energy is intermittent. And so what we demonstrate in the UK, we poured it out to Japan because they're an island, and we port to Chicago because it wants to be a net zero city. And so what we test out here is quite interesting for the world, and generally the policies and the freedoms and regulations here help. And over the time we benefit a lot by maybe over £5 million worth of projects with BIS and Innovate UK, testing out innovation, but the UK has always been quite difficult to scale these, and we solve that by partnering with global companies. And so it's kind of a combination, but there is an opportunity to do radical policy today rather than just sort of sit back and sort of do lazy intervention. So we need radical change in order to solve this radically hard problem.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, 3 very different but very interesting ideas, which we will be feeding in to the government through the Entrepreneurs Network think tank. Okay, everybody, it's now time for Q&A. So does anyone have any questions or indeed thoughts that you might want to raise at the moment? Here we go, yes.
Hiya. Andy from Honest Mobile. How do you all feel about competition in your respective spaces? So I guess over the last 3 years, the water getting pushed uphill has got a bit less uphill. But that means there's so many new businesses entering all of your spaces, doing similar things, trying to achieve the same mission. How do you sort of think about that as a business with your own ambitions and goals versus a mission which is greater than the business that you have yourselves?
I'm happy to start. We are very collaborative. So we actually work with an organisation called Count Us In that we were the founding member of. And that brings together a multitude of different some companies, some charities, but all aiming to help individual behaviour change. And, at times it can be, you can have some quite interesting conversations. People can feel a bit exposed. But our view is that, we've got a million different use cases, a million different needs across the world. Somebody over here can serve one use case, somebody over here can serve another. We've got such a massive problem. People have been at it for 30 years and, emissions are still going up. So I think, we'll work with anybody who's got the same mission as us, and as long as they're, nice to work with. I think that, in the grand scheme of things, is actually really important. Life's too short to work with people you find too challenging.
Personally, I love it. I think it's actually really important. Going back to what Joe's just saying about the last 30 years and the emissions still going up, I think what is going to happen now, very naturally, is you're going to have a lot of people that come from different industries coming in and thinking and understanding what their industries can do. So I've been doing this for coming up to 20 years, clearly doing something wrong because the emissions are going up. So actually it's brilliant. And also it makes us better. We are going to become a better organisation because we go, oh, look, they're doing really well. We need to do better because actually we need to recruit the same people. So I think it's really important. I think it's fantastic, personally.
I would agree collaboration is really critical to really scale, and competition is becoming popular, and the more the whole world needs to work this way. So there's going to be lots of competing companies doing similar things. I think sort of rolling up companies doing similar things is quite helpful as well, as sometimes it's been inefficient to have too many overlaps with people asking the same companies for money, same investors, same utilities to partner with. And so if you take lots of the sort of UK early startups, put them into make a sort of a mini Siemens, say, that would maybe be more effective. So I think we'll see that roll up because the whole world needs to change and adopt these technologies. And certainly people like Elon Musk say, bring on the competition because it helps get rid of these burning oil products. And so I think it's a healthy thing.
Thank you. Okay, excellent. Who's next? Yes.
I'm Brazilian from Rio. So actually my question is, we have at least two companies here that started in the early 2000s. And by then, the sustainability concerns were not so intense as they are today. So what made you persist rather than pivot, What made you insist? And I would like you to be very sincere in terms of your traction in the beginning. Did you see a lot of traction on your initial idea, or it was more, you had this belief, internal belief? Okay.
Brilliant question. Will, why don't you go first?
I used to be taken around Wimbledon Common to clear up litter by my gran growing up. I did my first climate change talk when I was 14. And I was reading my school reports the other day, and it was comment of, it was a rather odd talk. And now, when I set up Green Element, funnily enough, one of my biggest driving forces, yes, it was, of course, sustainability, but it was actually driving costs down. And because having grown up in my mum and dad worked for themselves for a small kitchen bathroom showroom shop and owned it, that I knew how important cost was. And so therefore, I'd already seen the correlation between carbon, environment, and cost of running the business. So you bring the carbon down, you bring the cost of the business down. So it was a bit of a no-brainer, and that was what I used to talk about. I would say that because I had no aspirations to rule the world, I had aspirations to have a lifestyle business at that moment in time. I did really well. I was able to go kite surfing. I was able to hang out with my friends who just had kids. But I got busier and busier. And I would say at around 2007, 2008, we were starting, and I probably could have been a bit more, bit better in business and grown much faster. The financial crash of 2008 definitely turned a corner, and it made people not want to be sustainable. But at that moment in time, you know, we worked for Omnicom, we worked for a number of very large organizations. They were doing it because they wanted to be more sustainable. So I think the appetite was there. The drive was also, I mean, remember the Climate Change Act. When did the Climate Change Act come out? It was 2010?
I think it might have been earlier.
Yeah, 2008, yeah. So if you think about it, the UK has been on that transition. ISO 14001 came out as an ISO in 1996. Before that was British Standard 7750, and that came out 10 years before that. So as much as, yes, it looks like it's been going on, it's been going for a really long time in the UK, and I almost felt I was late to the party back in the early 2000s.
And I mean, persistency is a really critical quality because it's a hard journey, particularly funding. And so you have to keep going despite rejections of ideas. I think, you know, I have a similar sort of point of origin. When I was 10 in 1980, we had the Save It campaign in schools with little stickers on every light switch and maps of homes. And I have this Osborne Book of the Future from 1979, which shows the electrified home with solar and organics and EVs and everything. And subconsciously, that's probably informed the patents I wrote. But over our journey, we did pivot. We launched in 2006 an AA reusable battery called a USB cell, which won an IF Gold Design Award, like a really small battery, before going to now manage some of the biggest batteries in the world. So we changed our story and our narrative to adapt as we learn things about the market. And indeed, if you look at some of the more successful companies in the US, they don't always scale for the initial idea. So Google itself had page ranking as a great algorithm. They shopped it round. Larry went round, and no one particularly liked. You know, Yahoo said, we don't want to place our algorithm with your algorithm. And so they carried on. Some they liked it academically. And then Sergey came up with this idea to sort of load balance this algorithm on less servers using something called tuples. And they went back and said, can we sell you our algorithm? They said, no, but the idea of running something on less servers is a good idea. Why don't you do corporate intranets to other people? So they tried that. And then they came up with their third idea, which was AdWords, which I'm simplifying slightly. But you know, if they didn't start off by funding AdWords, they evolved into that through a series of pivots. And what's interesting about the US funding system is quite often they let the innovators continue to be involved in running the company. In Europe, they tend to sort of, the point of origin tends to say, okay, now we bring in the professionals to run the company, and the innovators have less control. Maybe they've been diluted and they don't own as much of the company. So if they come up with a better idea, they might go and set it up somewhere else. But if you leave them in charge, they'll fix the first idea because it might not be the right thing, or it might not be a time appropriate. We lived through the 2008 crash. We were about to license our technology to some very big brands, and we had nearly signed contracts before they said, actually, we're not doing any new business for the next 2 years till they focused on their core. So we had to adapt. And so adaptation, both to market as well as persistency, is really important, but also timing. You know, innovation is sort of a bit like comedy. It's like sort of coming up with the right joke at the right content. You know, if you watch a 10-year-old Have I Got News For You, it isn't funny. If you watch one from the future, it doesn't have any context. So innovation has to have context. When we started, this global energy transition context was known about in the academics, but not acted upon, and the investors didn't see any money in it yet. And then a bit later, they saw money in it, and then they lost quite a lot of money in the sector because things were too early, and they needed to wait to actually everyone starts buying these things because there's a growth need. So a combination of things are important, but you've got to be persistent, because otherwise, sort of, you know, if you miss the window.
And Joe, even starting your business, a bit later, within the last decade, presumably at the point where you started it, you could see there was this gap because there wasn't anything else that existed. So at that point, did it feel like you were joining a growing movement, or did it still feel like you were kind of going into territory where you had to do quite a lot of convincing? Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, because I'd worked at CDP from 2006, when it was, it was quite pioneering then, whereas now it's very much mainstream. Even then, we were working with really big companies and really big investors, and the big investors, some at least,
got it already, albeit segments of big investment houses, but and some companies as well did. But in terms of it becoming mainstream, we were very, very far from that. And even in 2017, when we started Giki, it was totally fortuitous timing, really. But there was a growing need, I think, for individuals to have some guidance that wasn't really there then. But I mean, it's ramped up. Literally every 6 months, right up through until COP26 in Glasgow last year. And when, sustainability and all things climate were the thing, particularly in the UK. And I would say, because we are the way we are as humans, maybe it's been a little bit less prioritised this year with all the other stuff that's going on in the world. But I think, these things ebb and flow, but generally the trajectory is a positive one in terms of focus.
We'll go to you, and then we'll go to you.
Sorry, I have 2 questions. You're the experts here, and can you genuinely tell me how sustainable is nuclear energy? Because obviously I'm aware that there's all this nuclear waste being buried in, underneath.
So I mean,
Simon, you're our man for this.
So there's a parallel universe where in the 70s we didn't have all this anti-nuclear, and we just built nuclear because it was an early technology, and we wouldn't have a climate problem today. We might have a cancer problem, we might have a sort of multiple Chernobyl problem, but we wouldn't have a climate problem. So there is a parallel universe where that happened, because nuclear is a technology, it was young, it could have evolved. And the investment recently is going to show a whole bunch of new safe nuclear technologies. And even the late James Lovelock, who founded Gaia movement, was also instrumental in this early sort of anti-nuclear thing. He later sort of realized how important nuclear would have been to changing the world, and so then became sort of pro-nuclear. So it is an important technology, and yes, there are difficulties in today's technology in storing these things, and there are problems with the early technology because it's still pretty embryonic in how it's built. And obviously, you can see the trajectory in Japan where things went wrong, changed the energy system, but now they're restarting that because in the balance of things going wrong, not having a global gas supply, not having replaced it in time, nuclear is still a good technology. So it's challenging but it is still a low carbon technology, and it's challenging in the long term. But compared to the other things, it could have evolved had it had investment. It's difficult to restart it today because it takes a decade to build these things. If you build them in the old way, it probably. The innovations from Rolls-Royce to do mini things which used to be in subs in scale, and these new mini things from the US are probably a better approach than building sort of decade-long projects.
I'm going to take this opportunity to ask a question around the situation with the nuclear power stations in Ukraine. Do you think that there is a very high chance of something going wrong with those, and would that push back innovations?
Yeah, I think it's quite, it's very tactical from Putin to deliberately sort of create a wasteland if you can't win the war. These things are pretty resilient. So most of the evidence is it does take a lot of effort to destroy these things. But if you're chucking missiles at every day, it is a dangerous situation. And that would then turn back some of the sort of renuclearization which Brookfield and other people are funding in Europe to sort of say, actually, nuclear is still good. And it's about perception. So interestingly, my conjecture as a personal view is when the UK approved Hinkley, it didn't really matter whether Hinkley's built because the world decided to go nuclear. Because the UK approved it, therefore all these other countries said actually nuclear may be possible. So, but it's a shame it hasn't had the 40 years worth of innovation and technology and design, which the internet has and all these other things, because probably today we wouldn't have the carbon problem. But it probably was the wrong timing to do these things then, and definitely the context out of the Cold War with all the dangerous activity with nuclear weapons and things probably wasn't the right context to do that technology.
You could put it on, because I remember Tony Blair and the talking about nuclear back in the early 2000s, and I could never understand why they just didn't. They just talked because it was so much easier to win another vote than it was to actually say what it is that you think you should do. Yeah. And I remember getting really annoyed, just make a decision. Yeah. Personally, my decision was get nuclear because you could see then it was a part of the future, but you just didn't get it.
Yeah, and this is what, I mean, the announcements today recognise that actually fixing energy supply in the long term, not just the short term, is critical. So, whilst another review is risky, but actually there is a context to make proper decisions and invest properly to get these things done, because it also is interesting having a 2050 target, because you can make a multiple decade plan, because there is a legal requirement and a social and environmental requirement and a moral requirement to get to net zero by 2050. And that's a planning context which inputs to make a business plan. And then this transition is the biggest business opportunity in the world for governments and policymakers and companies.
And I think the government have been putting out, they've put out various kind of reviews, but they haven't as of yet given us a full roadmap of where you need to be year on year, which is another challenge. But anyway, I'm not the expert. I'm asking the experts. Yes, sir.
How do you get rid of domestic and commercial gas boilers? Because the alternative currently with heat pumps seems to be too expensive to put them in, and most of the housing stock we need radiators running at 80 degrees, not lower temperatures.
I would say that it is all about creating the right policy incentives for people. So it's true that heat pumps don't work in all houses. I live in a house that's 600 years old, and that has challenges with heat pump, but we will crack them. And I think actually as the technology evolves, they are becoming much more appropriate for a whole range of housing stock. They're more challenging in flats, and there are lots of complexities, but there has to be an incentivization for the individual that makes it cost effective, and there has to be incentives for businesses to set up and actually deliver in a way that is of a high enough quality at scale, such that you can build out in a reasonable time frame, which is, we manage to build a multitude of new houses every year, which should all, in my view, require heat pumps and the latest renewable technologies. That is where policy has a really crucial role to play, because unless you're in the super green category, the chances are, even if you really want to, you're going to find it very challenging to change those technologies, because a regular boiler costs $5,000, a heat pump costs 10 or 12. So it's the sums don't work at the moment.
So if there's sustained high energy prices for gas, then the economics for used to be sort of 10 or 20 year payback drop significantly.
Yeah.
So there was analysis recently where solar power, solar and battery and electric heating, significantly are much better than the gas boilers, given the price of gas. So it's easy to do those numbers given how extreme gas is. But there's also a lot of money going into investing in these new hardware technologies, which reduces the cost and improves their COP, and also makes them more available. So you have community heating, you have better insulation, you have robots which insulate your floors. There's a friend's company has sort of rock batteries which store energy at high temperature, which you can use to heat 600-year-old houses which have bad insulation, where you can't touch single glazed windows because of the policy rules. So there's a whole bunch of things underway, but it's happening quite late, because had we started and done more of this investment 10 to 20 years ago and changed the policies, it wouldn't be such a rush to halve carbon as quickly as the targets now require us to.
And there are also opportunities coming out of financial institutions where they're offering sort of green loans, which are very, very low interest loans, which enable people to put these technologies in on a loan, and then when they sell their house, the sort of price increase then covers the cost of that loan. So there are some things coming out, not just government, but also from financial institutions.
The original Green Deal idea was correct, except for having to borrow money at a high interest rate. If you could have drawn down your pension and spent it on some green technology, it would have made sense, because there's a scary number I did before the energy price went up, is to retire you may need £100,000 lump sum to pay your index energy bill over the sort of typical 20-year retirement span. So if you knew you had a £100,000 requirement, you might decide to spend something on insulation and something on some better low energy or no fuel energy source, because it makes sense over a 20-year retirement. And the government is responsible for paying most of the pensions, so it should make that decision for you in aggregate. But most people don't have a pension pot more than £30,000-40,000, so they can't even pay their energy bill, so they're just paying the year-on-year bill rather than taking the long view. But the government could take the long view in its policy and encourage certain technologies, and now has to, because we do need to insulate better, we do need to change the source of heating, we need to get rid of gas, and we should never really sell any gas or oil-based product again if we're going to hit the targets.
Excellent. Guys, we have time for one more question. So anyone keen to take it? You've had one, so we're going to come to you.
Hello, John Draper. I just want to make an observation on that previous question, actually, because nobody actually mentioned hydrogen as a possible solution in the home heating conversation. And I think it's known that using offshore wind power and other renewable sources, you can produce hydrogen. Actually, there have been trials done where you can put hydrogen in the gas network, and in theory, you could almost replace gas boilers one for one with hydrogen boilers, which would heat, and particularly for the hard-to-abate houses that exist. However, I just want to make two other points about it, which is one was hydrogen actually is going to be a lot more expensive, as it was pointed out to me the other day, because for every unit of hydrogen electric energy you produce, by the time you then convert it to hydrogen, ship it to the home, burn it in the home in a boiler, you actually get half a unit of. Can you still hear me? Whereas an air source heat pump, to go back to the heat pump question, actually for every unit of electricity you burn or you produce in your wind farm, by the time it gets to home, I think you can all hear me anyway, 3 units of heat in the home, because it uses the energy from the air around you. And therefore you can see that broadly hydrogen is going to be a lot more expensive than heat pumps as a solution. And the other point I was going to make is heat pumps are actually a lot cheaper than people think. So we've installed one and it cost us £1,500 to unit. And I just look at these numbers that are quoted from people and go, where do those come from? Because it's a lot different from the actual reality on the ground.
Well, thank you. Good observations. Does anyone want to come back on that
I think
very quickly?
That's fair. I mean, hydrogen does have a role as a transition fuel. It does have the problem in its economics for heating. But I mean, before COP, I went to the Responsible Energy Forum, which is a sort of, it was a bit like a Spectre meeting of all the oil guys. But you have to have these guys in the room to solve the problem, because they have the infrastructure and the technologies which can make hydrogen work in the short term or carbon capture, and you can't just ignore them. You can't say, okay, you're not invited to COP, which they weren't. They have to be in the room helping you to solve the problem, even if fundamentally they have to change their entire business model within the decade, and they will be resistant to that. But hydrogen is certainly a transition. Ultimately, electrifying everything is a good answer, but you do need a massive amount of infrastructure to electrify everything, and so that's what we're working on.
Am I right in saying that hydrogen is a good fuel for long-distance transport? And that's what they're really looking at hydrogen for? That's the kind of sweet spot for hydrogen.
Yeah, and HGVs as well. They're exploring it, because also there's the problem of shipping it to the place where it then is dispensed to whoever the end user is. But for HGVs, it's more manageable.
Well, I mean, it's all very complex, and that's why we need to keep having these conversations and finding more nuanced solutions to different things, because it might work in some places and not in others. Guys, we're wrapping up. We're coming to the end, so we're going to wrap up with a dual question to each of you, succinct if you will. One, what's coming next for your business? And also a sort of one-point suggestion to everyone in the room and at home about what they can do immediately to impact their carbon footprint. Will?
What's coming for us in the business? I would say that what we're doing now is amalgamating, bringing the businesses together. So we've got Compare Your Footprint, which is a carbon reporting software company. We've got Green Element, which is quite a niche, bespoke environmental management company. And then we've now got Sustainability Solved Media, which is a community-based media platform that incorporates we've had a podcast for the last 5 years. And so it's incorporating that kind of communications strategy and behaviour change that comes interweaving into all the packages of Green Elements and the software. What can you do? I can talk about it as a business. Why doesn't everyone look up if you've got a website or if you work for a company, look up their website carbon after this and see where it is. And if it's bad, go and speak to someone that can do something about it.
And how do we do that?
Go to website carbon. .com.
Okay, all right, that's very straightforward. Thank you, Will. Joe.
So in the next 12 months, we are all about execution. We've got the foundations right. We've got a fantastic team. We're happy with our 2 key components of our product. Now it's just carry on with our plan, execute our plan, which is actually a very nice position to be in. We've just got to, scale now. We're in the sort of early stages of scaling, and it takes, you have it's a very different situation than when you're in startup phase. But it's exciting, and I think it's just keep on track, not too much new stuff. And what can people do? Well, of course, you're all individuals, so go on Giki Zero. Find the right steps for you, because we are all different. And, if you live in a central London flat and you don't have a car because you don't need one, your footprint's going to look very different than if you live in, middle of the countryside and your house is full of drafts. Just from a home perspective, that's before you look at travel, food, goods, services, our pensions, our bank accounts. All of these things are all things to consider. So you can dig in at whatever level you want to.
So I mentioned, Moixa was acquired by Lunar Energy recently, and so as a new company, we're trying to electrify everything. And so if we electrify and get rid of any fuel-based thing, that's really helpful. And we're trying to sort of get as many batteries and EVs under management, because if we aggregate that, all that is virtual power plants to reduce grid peak, to reduce any use of fossil fuels at the peak and the bill. On an individual basis, going solar is key if you can get it. That would be reducing your bill today. Efficiency is still really important, turning off things. People forget that. We leave a lot of things on. And also, time of use pricing will be impactful, because if we use things at off-peak, that helps the overall grid, helps reduce the need for these peaker plants. So that is kind of critical to the transition. On an individual basis, also growing food is really helpful. If you grow vegetables and things, it's much better. We need to think about food security as well. We've had a big energy shock that's going to translate into an even bigger food shock and a water shock. So conservation, of thinking really through localism, is going to be really critical going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you to Will, Joe, and Simon for joining us today. If you want to find out more about green entrepreneurship and maybe get involved in the Green Entrepreneurship Forum, you can find out more about that at the Entrepreneurs Network website, which is tentrepreneurs.org. And huge thanks to the Office Group for allowing us to have this panel today. And thank you to everybody for coming here and at home. Good night.